Sarah Martinez stared at her reflection in the JFK Airport bathroom mirror, attempting to tame her unruly dark curls for the third time. The fluorescent lights highlighted the dark circles under her brown eyes, evidence of 3 weeks of double shifts at Angelo's diner. Her hands trembled slightly as she splashed cold water on her face, trying to wake herself up. She couldn't afford to miss this flight, not when her grandmother Eleanor needed her in Paris. The memory of her Aunt Marie's phone call from 2 days ago still made her stomach clench. "Sarah, your grandmother's condition has worsened significantly," Marie had said, her usually steady voice breaking. "The doctors say we should prepare ourselves. I've bought you a ticket. You need to come now." The ticket was a miracle Sarah couldn't have afforded on her own, not with an 8-year-old daughter and barely making ends meet on a waitress's salary. This morning's goodbye with Emily had nearly broken her heart. Her daughter had clung to her at the front door, small fingers gripping Sarah's worn denim jacket. "Mommy, why can't I come with you?" Emily had asked, her big brown eyes filling with tears. "Promise you'll video call every day?" Sarah had knelt down, pulling her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo. "Every single day, baby. I promise. And I'll bring you back something special from Paris." She'd tried to sound excited, to make it an adventure rather than the potentially final goodbye to a grandmother. Emily barely remembered. Jack, her ex-husband, had stood in the doorway watching them, his disapproval evident in his crossed arms and tight jaw. Their divorce 2 years ago had left deep scars, but he was still Emily's father, and right now he was her only option for childcare. "I'll take good care of her," he'd said stiffly, as if reading her thoughts. "Just keep in touch." The unspoken tension between them hung heavy in the air, the same tension that had eventually torn their marriage apart. Final boarding call for Flight AF-23 to Paris, Charles de Gaulle. The announcement jerked Sarah back to the present. She grabbed her worn leather bag and rushed through the terminal, her sensible black flats slapping against the polished floor. Her heart pounded as she weaved through the crowd, muttering apologies as she bumped into fellow travelers. She reached the gate just as the attendant was preparing to close the door. "Wait, please," she called out, waving her boarding pass. The attendant's initial frown softened at Sarah's obvious distress, and she quickly scanned the ticket. "Hurry along, dear. You're in 24C. Sarah practically stumbled down the jet bridge, trying to catch her breath. Inside the plane, she made her way down the narrow aisle, apologizing as she bumped into seated passengers with her bag. When she reached row 24, she stopped short. A man in an impeccably tailored navy suit occupied the window seat, his attention focused on a leather-bound book. Even seated, she could tell he was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair threaded with distinguished silver at the temples. As she struggled to lift her bag into the overhead compartment, her arms trembling from exhaustion, the man looked up. The book in his hands was a well-worn copy of The Great Gatsby, something she taught her 8th-grade students during her brief teaching career before Emily was born. "Please allow me," he said, standing in one fluid motion. His voice carried a slight British accent, and his eyes, a striking shade of green, met hers with unexpected warmth. He easily lifted her bag, their fingers brushing momentarily, sending an unexpected current through her tired body. "Thank you," Sarah managed, sliding into her seat. She was acutely aware of her simple jeans and faded sweater next to his obvious luxury. "I'm not usually this." She gestured vaguely, not sure how to explain that she was normally more put together, even if that hadn't been true for quite some time. "James Bennett," he introduced himself with a gentle smile that transformed his serious face. "And no explanation needed." "Long day, long month," Sarah replied, attempting to return his smile while trying to get comfortable in the cramped economy seat. She hadn't been on a plane since her honeymoon 7 years ago, and she'd forgotten how confined it felt. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, their practiced movements barely registering in her exhaustion-clouded mind. As the plane taxied and took off, Sarah tried to focus on the city lights below, but her eyes kept growing heavier. The past few weeks of overtime shifts, arranging Emily's care and worrying about her grandmother, had finally caught up with her. She fought to stay awake, not wanting to seem rude to her seat companion, who had been nothing but kind. "It's a long flight," James said softly, noticing her struggle. "Get some rest. I promise not to be offended." His voice reminded her of the audiobooks she sometimes played for Emily at bedtime, warm, cultured, and oddly comforting. Sarah meant to thank him, but the words never made it past her lips. The gentle hum of the engines, the darkness outside the window, and the warmth of the cabin conspired against her remaining consciousness. Her head gradually tilted to the side until it found rest on something firm yet comfortable, James's shoulder. In her last moments of awareness, she thought she should move, apologize, but exhaustion won out. She didn't feel the gentle way James shifted slightly to make her more comfortable, or notice how he carefully draped his suit jacket over her when the cabin grew chilly. She didn't see the way he signaled the flight attendant to hold off on dinner service, ensuring her sleep wouldn't be disturbed. What she also didn't know was that James Bennett, CEO of Bennett International Holdings and one of London's most eligible bachelors, had just cancelled his dinner meeting in Paris via a quick email on his phone. For the first time in years, his carefully planned schedule suddenly seemed less important than ensuring the sleeping woman beside him got the rest she so clearly needed. As the plane cruised over the Atlantic, neither of them could have predicted how this accidental moment of vulnerability would change both their lives. Sarah didn't know that her grandmother's illness would lead her not just to Paris, but to a chance at love she never expected. And she certainly couldn't have imagined that her ex-husband Jack, back in New York with Emily, would soon throw an unexpected obstacle in their path, one that would test whatever was beginning to spark between her and the kind stranger who let her sleep on his shoulder at 35,000 feet. Sarah woke with a start as the plane hit a patch of turbulence. For a moment, she felt disoriented, her mind foggy with sleep. Then she realized with horror that she had been using James Bennett's shoulder as a pillow. She jerked upright, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. His expensive suit jacket slid from her shoulders, and she caught it reflexively. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, mortified. "I didn't mean to—" She stopped as James turned to her with a reassuring smile that made her heart skip a beat. "So you needed the rest," he said simply, as if having a stranger fall asleep on him was the most natural thing in the world. "We're about halfway to Paris now. Would you like some water?" He pressed the call button before she could respond. Sarah noticed that the cabin lights had been dimmed, and most passengers were either sleeping or watching movies on their screens. A quick glance at her watch confirmed she'd been asleep for nearly 4 hours. "I can't believe I slept so long," she murmured, running a hand through her hair self-consciously. The flight attendant appeared with 2 bottles of water, greeting James by name with a familiarity that made Sarah curious. As she handed them their drinks, she smiled knowingly between them, making Sarah's blush deepen. "You seem to fly this route often," Sarah observed, taking a grateful sip of water. Her throat was parched, and she suddenly realized she had missed dinner service. James nodded, adjusting his position to face her better. "London to New York and back more times than I can count, though usually I'm in—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "A different section of the plane." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. Of course, the designer suit, the flight attendant's familiarity, his entire bearing, he usually flew first class. "Why aren't you there now?" she asked before she could stop herself. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Last-minute booking. The flight was full except for this seat." He didn't mention that he could have easily pulled strings to get a first-class seat if he'd wanted to. Something about the woman next to him had made him decline when the gate agent had offered to upgrade him. Their conversation flowed naturally after that. James told her about growing up in London's Chelsea neighbourhood, his years at Oxford, and his work in international business consulting. Though he modestly understated his actual position, Sarah found herself opening up about Emily, her teaching career, and how she'd ended up waiting tables after the divorce. "Emily sounds remarkable," James said warmly when Sarah showed him a photo on her phone of her daughter's recent school art project. "She has your smile." Sarah felt a familiar pang of guilt. She wanted to come with me, but with school and everything, she trailed off, remembering Emily's tearful goodbye. "It's the first time I've been away from her for more than a day since the divorce." "That must be difficult," James said softly. His hand moved slightly on the armrest between them, as if he wanted to offer comfort, but wasn't sure if he should. "How long will you be in Paris?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice catching. "My grandmother, she's not well. The doctors say it could be weeks or—" She couldn't finish the sentence. To her horror, tears began welling in her eyes. Without hesitation, James reached into his jacket pocket and produced a crisp white handkerchief. The gesture was so old-fashioned and gentlemanly that it made Sarah laugh despite her tears. "Who even carries these anymore?" she asked, dabbing at her eyes. "My mother would be mortified if I didn't," he replied with a grin that made him look younger, more boyish. "She raised me with very specific ideas about what a gentleman should always have on hand." Sarah tried to return the handkerchief, but he waved it away. "Keep it. Consider it a souvenir of the time you used a complete stranger as a pillow." His teasing tone made her laugh again, and Sarah felt something shift inside her. For the first time since her divorce, she felt truly comfortable with a man. There was something about James that put her at ease, despite his obvious wealth and sophistication, or perhaps because of it. He seemed so confident in himself that he had no need to make others feel small. As they talked, Sarah noticed other passengers beginning to stir. The cabin lights brightened gradually, and the smell of coffee began wafting through the air. Flight attendants started preparing for breakfast service. "I could murder a cup of coffee," Sarah said, suddenly realizing how hungry she was after missing dinner. As if on cue, her stomach growled audibly, making her blush again. James chuckled and pressed the call button once more. When the flight attendant appeared, he quietly asked her something that Sarah couldn't hear. Minutes later, she returned with 2 full breakfast trays, but these weren't the standard economy class meals. These were clearly from first class, complete with fresh croissants, fruit, and steaming coffee in proper cups. "You shouldn't have," Sarah protested, even as her mouth watered at the sight. "I can't let you—" "Consider it payment for being such an excellent pillow," James interrupted smoothly. "Besides, airplane food is always better shared with good company." As they ate breakfast together, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks through the small window, Sarah felt a flutter of excitement that had nothing to do with the coffee. She found herself hoping that perhaps their connection wouldn't end when they landed in Paris. What she didn't know was that James was already formulating a plan to ensure it wouldn't. In his jacket pocket, his phone buzzed with meeting notifications that he continued to ignore. For the first time in his highly structured life, James Bennet was choosing to let fate, and a chance encounter with a sleeping stranger, take the lead. The plane landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport under a cloudy Parisian sky. As they waited to disembark, James helped Sarah retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment. "Let me give you my card," he said, reaching into his suit jacket. "Perhaps we could have coffee while you're in Paris." Sarah's heart fluttered as she accepted his business card, her eyes widening slightly as she read his title, James Bennet, CEO, Bennet International Holdings. She looked up at him with new understanding. "You're not just in business consulting, are you?" James had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have understated my position a bit. I didn't want it to—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Change things." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from her Aunt Marie. "Where are you? Your grandmother's condition has worsened. Come straight to the hospital." Her hands began trembling as she read the message. "Is everything all right?" James asked, noticing her distress. "My grandmother, I need to get to the hospital right away," Sarah explained, her voice shaking. Without hesitation, James took charge. "My driver is waiting outside. Let me take you there," he offered. Seeing her hesitation, he added, "Please, it's the least I can do." Minutes later, they were in a sleek black Mercedes, speeding through the streets of Paris. Sarah barely registered the iconic landmarks they passed, her mind focused entirely on her grandmother. James sat beside her in reassuring silence, occasionally squeezing her hand when she seemed particularly anxious. At the hospital, James insisted on waiting with her while she found her aunt. When Marie appeared, a tall, elegant woman in her 50s, her eyes were red from crying. "Sarah, thank God you're here," she said, embracing her niece. Then she noticed James and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "This is James," Sarah explained quickly. "We met on the plane. He helped me get here faster." Marie's expression softened with gratitude. "Your grandmother is asking for you," Marie said gently. "The doctors say—" She glanced at James, then back to Sarah. "We should talk privately." James understood immediately. "I'll leave you with your family," he said softly. "But please call me if you need anything. Anything at all." He squeezed Sarah's hand one last time before leaving. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical terms, quiet conversations and tears. Elena, Sarah's grandmother, drifted in and out of consciousness. During one lucid moment, she squeezed Sarah's hand and whispered, "My little bird, you came." The childhood nickname brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. Late that evening, while Marie went to get coffee, Sarah checked her phone and found several missed calls from Jack. Worried about Emily, she stepped into the hallway to return his calls. "Where the hell have you been?" Jack's angry voice filled her ear. "And who's this guy you're running around Paris with?" Sarah froze. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Sarah. Emily's teacher saw you on Instagram. Some CEO posted a photo from his plane with you sleeping on his shoulder. It's all over social media. What kind of example are you setting for our daughter?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She quickly opened Instagram and found what Jack was talking about. There it was. A photo she hadn't known was taken, showing her asleep on James's shoulder, his jacket draped over her. The caption read, "Sometimes the best meetings happen by chance. Parisian sunrise." It had thousands of likes and comments, many speculating about the mysterious woman in the photo. Her hands shaking, Sarah scrolled through the comments. Some were kind, but others were vicious, calling her a gold digger and worse. Several tabloid websites had already picked up the story. London's most eligible bachelor found love in economy class. "Jack, it's not what you think," Sarah began, but he cut her off. "I'm consulting with my lawyer. This kind of publicity isn't good for Emily. Maybe it's time we revisit our custody arrangement." "You can't do that." Sarah's voice rose, drawing concerned looks from passing nurses. "It was just a chance meeting on a plane. I'm here for Grandma Elena, you know that." "Tell that to the judge," Jack snapped before hanging up. Sarah leaned against the wall, her legs weak. How had everything spiraled so quickly? She opened her messages to text James to ask him to take down the photo, but stopped when she saw he'd already sent her several urgent messages. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. My PR team posted that photo without my knowledge. I've had it taken down, but the damage is done. Please let me explain. Can we meet? I never meant for this to happen." Just then, Marie burst out of their grandmother's room. "Sarah, come quickly!" Sarah rushed back inside to find doctors surrounding her grandmother's bed, the machines beeping urgently. Time seemed to slow as she watched them work, her world narrowing to the sound of her own heartbeat, and the desperate prayer repeating in her mind, "Please, not yet, not like this." Standing in that sterile hospital room, watching her grandmother fight for life, Sarah felt everything slipping away, her chance at romance with James, possibly even custody of Emily. How had a simple act of falling asleep on a plane turned her entire world upside down in less than 24 hours? The doctors worked swiftly, professionally, speaking rapid French that Sarah couldn't fully understand. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the chief physician turned to them with an unexpected smile. "She's stabilized," he announced in accented English. "The new medication is working. Your grandmother is stronger than we thought." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair, relief washing over her in waves. Marie hugged her tightly, both of them crying tears of joy. When they were finally allowed back at Elena's bedside, her grandmother was awake and more alert than she'd been in days. "You brought me luck, my little bird," Elena whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand. "But why do you look so troubled? This old woman isn't going anywhere just yet." Sarah couldn't hold back anymore. Through tears, she told her grandmother everything, about meeting James, the viral photo, and Jack's threats. Elena listened with the wisdom of someone who had seen many of life's storms come and go. "Your Jack," Elena said firmly, "is acting from fear and jealousy. He knows you're moving forward with your life and it frightens him." She paused to catch her breath. "As for this James of yours, where is he now?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Everything happened so fast." A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. James stood in the doorway, still in his suit from the plane but looking somewhat disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through his hair repeatedly. In his arms was an enormous bouquet of fresh flowers. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said softly. "I've been in the waiting room for hours. The nurses finally took pity on me and told me your grandmother was better." He looked directly at Sarah. "I couldn't leave without making things right." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with interest. "Marie," she said suddenly, "I think we need coffee, lots of coffee." Marie, hiding a smile, helped Eleanor sit up and followed her cue, leaving Sarah and James alone. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," James began, placing the flowers on a nearby table. "I had no idea my team would do that. They're used to managing my public image, but this crossed a line. I've personally fired the person responsible." "It's not just about the photo," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Jack is threatening to take Emily away. My whole life I've tried to be the perfect mother. to never give him any ammunition against me. And now, stop, James said firmly, crossing the room to take her hands in his. I've already handled it. My legal team contacted Jack an hour ago. They explained that if he pursues any custody changes based on that photo, he'll face a massive lawsuit for defamation and emotional distress. They also reminded him that attempting to use social media speculation to separate a mother from her child wouldn't look good to any judge. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You did that for me? I'd do a lot more than that, James said softly. Sarah, I know we've only known each other for a day, but sometimes a day is all it takes to know something is special. He reached up to brush away a tear from her cheek. I'm not asking for anything except a chance to see where this might go. At your pace, on your terms. But your life is so different from mine, Sarah protested weakly. I'm just a waitress from New York. You're a devoted mother, a loving granddaughter, and the kind of person who apologizes for falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder. James interrupted with a smile. That's who you are, the rest is just details. From her bed, Elena called out, Sarah, if you don't say yes to that handsome man, I'm getting out of this bed and knocking some sense into you. They both laughed, breaking the tension. Your grandmother has excellent hearing, James observed. And excellent taste, Elena shouted back, making them laugh again. Sarah looked up at James, really looked at him. Behind the wealth and the power, she saw the same kind man who had draped his jacket over her on the plane, who had waited hours in a hospital just to make things right. Okay, she said softly. Yes. James's smile lit up his entire face. Yes to seeing where this goes. Yes to coffee in Paris. Yes to taking a chance. He pulled her close, and right there in her grandmother's hospital room with the beeping of medical machines as their background music, they shared their first kiss. It was gentle, sweet, and full of promise. About time, Eleanor declared from her bed. They turned to find her and Marie watching them with matching grins. Now, James, tell me about your family. And Sarah, call Emily. That poor child must be worried sick. The next hour passed in a blur of FaceTime calls with Emily, who was thrilled to meet a real-life prince on video. Comfortable conversation, and more coffee than anyone should probably drink. Jack sent a terse message apologizing for his reaction and assuring Sarah that Emily was fine and custody wouldn't be an issue. Later that evening, as James drove Sarah to her aunt's house where she'd be staying, they passed the Eiffel Tower, glittering against the night sky. I've always wanted to see Paris, Sarah mused, but I never imagined it quite like this. Life rarely goes as we imagine, James replied, taking her hand. Sometimes it's better. Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers and smiled. Who would have thought that a delayed flight, an exhausted single mom and an accidental nap would lead to this? Her grandmother was recovering, Emily was safe, and somehow, in the midst of chaos, she'd found something she wasn't even looking for. Better indeed, she whispered, squeezing his hand as they drove through the city of light, their story just beginning.